What would you do if your father locked you in a bunker, vanished without a word, and the world above simply ceased to exist? Andrew Najberg is a speculative fiction and horror author whose work blends cosmic dread, quantum physics, family trauma, and psychological terror into stories that refuse to let you look away. He has built a reputation for crafting dark, unflinching narratives that operate on both an intimate human level and a staggering apocalyptic scale. His latest novel, Eat the Light, follows two young sisters abandoned in a fallout shelter who emerge into a ruined world stalked by glowing figures that are as terrifying as they are unknowable. This is the Dark Mind Podcast. If you enjoy the show, please support it by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the dark conversation alive. So without further ado, I give you Andrew Najberg. Andrew, welcome to the show, or I guess I should say welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, man. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 15th day of March 2026. When you contacted me about your upcoming book, I was really curious to see where your work would go next. And what I found was your signature blend of speculative fiction with deep sci-fi apocalyptic elements, rich family dynamics, and your knack for weaving in quantum physics as well. The action was intense, but not over the top. The psychological terror was mind-bending, but genuine. And the ending was insane enough to possibly come true one day, in my opinion. So I thoroughly enjoyed it and appreciate you joining me on the show today to dive into the rabbit hole that we're both notorious for exploring.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I'll definitely say, I'm really proud of this one. And, especially for a lot of those reasons you just mentioned. So I'm really excited to talk about it.
Hell yeah. Well, a brief synopsis. The book follows two young sisters, Alyssa and Tabitha, whose father comes home one day acting strangely, locks them in a fallout shelter beneath their house, and vanishes along with their mother. No explanation, no warning, just a door sealed shut between them and the outside world. When the girls finally surface, that world is gone. The streets they grew up on are empty and decaying. The rain corrodes whatever it touches. And moving through the ruins are the Shimmer People, glowing figures that stalk the landscape with no logic and no mercy. And that is where the story takes off. So the concept of locking your children away is an act most parents wouldn't survive making. How did you write that moment so readers could hold both the horror and the cold logic of it at the same time?
So I think a couple of the elements that are meant to really sell it is, of course, first off, you have the father who comes home that day with a shotgun. It's the first detail you get of him. So it's something that just, snaps it into focus right away. That's, I think, anyone would recognize that something dire is wrong. But at the same time, I really did work with Tabby's reaction to that moment, where, she doesn't even, she runs and gives him a hug, doesn't even notice the weapon that he, is brandishing at first. And so I wanted there to be such a severe disconnect that, this was also something that kind of, it didn't even fall on the radar because it was so unreal and so out of the normal context of interaction. But I think the thing that really is most meant to sell the moment is that even though the mother resists against it in her initial reaction, she's clearly upset. You hear them arguing from the other room. It's also very clear that immediately after she is on board with it. And so one of the goals was to have the reader understand at that moment that, something bad had either happened or been done. And at the same time, that it was so terrible that the mother immediately acquiesces, despite her frustration and anger, and immediately begins assisting in shepherding the children. So I think, the idea is to convey such a clear necessity while also emphasizing just how foreign this is to that family.
Yeah. And, I'm not going to confirm or deny any particular scenario, but when that happens, all these things go through my head about what they could possibly be arguing about. Like one thing popped into my head immediately. And then as it progressed, I was like, well, maybe it could be this, it could be this. And as funny as the concept initially is of a man walking into a home holding a shotgun and acting like, what, this is what I do. I always carry this around, at the same time, it's just very creepy and off-putting.
Oh yeah. I want people to, from the beginning, have at least some mistrust for the father. And for, really for both parents for that matter, actually, but more so the father. I do want him to sort of pretty quickly be a locus of problem because, as, once the girls are closed into the shelter, one of my biggest goals was to think about, okay, so what can they already know? And, what are they going to feel like they need to know? And one of the reasons why I decided to work with such young protagonists for this story, aside from, more personal reasons about wanting to, bring about a certain type of emotional investment in the characters, was, basically, kids get all their information, or the majority of their information, from their parents first and foremost. And so in terms of wanting to have these characters who are very much, quite literally, in the dark, in the shelter, I needed them to be young. And then immediately, who are they going to look to for answers? Okay, so it's going to be the father and the mother. For narrative reasons, you see pretty quickly that the mother has a very particular relationship, especially with Alyssa. It is very antagonistic in nature, but at the same time, you see that she is the one who is upset over what's happened. And so I hope that would also then bring the father into question, where these two kids either can ask, why haven't we been told what's going on? Or has something, happened that has forced us to be down here, and whose fault would that be? The only person would be the parents at that point.
Yeah. Well, Alyssa and Tabitha are left to figure out survival entirely on their own, aside from rattling around the blame or what's even behind this entire situation. So how did your relationship with your own sister that we've spoken about, I believe she's a physician, is that right?
She's retired from actively practicing medicine. She now, she was an ER physician for about, it's got to be about 15 years. Then she ran a clinic for several years, and finally decided to go off and basically remove the stress of emergency medicine from her life.
I know the feeling.
Absolutely.
Not I don't as a doctor, but
yeah, I don't envy the decision making, the weight of the decisions. It's hard enough when you're dealing with fictional characters, let alone life and death with real people. But no, her relationship was definitely a major part of this. She's 3.5 years older, and I'd be lying to say that some of the relationship, especially from Tabitha looking towards Alyssa, some of that was definitely drawn from my own experiences with my sister, our dynamic, especially things like one of my favorite scenes. Actually, it's very innocuous in its nature when they play Scrabble together. That's my sister and I grew up playing board games, and that was one of our main ways of passing time. We had countless arguments. It was always on the backdrop of all sorts of serious things going on in our life. So, there'd be household crises going on, and we'd just be sitting there playing board games, and we'd process, the world in some ways through those weirdly contained environments that those kinds of interactions generate. And then the other place that I drew it very heavily from, though, is, my wife and I like to joke that, our kids are quite literally clones of us, where my daughter, Jillian, is, she's 13, and she is exactly like me, just gender swapped. But personality wise, we have the same sense of humor. We have a lot of the same habits, same interests. It's really kind of funny. Whereas my son is enormously like my wife. They're again, personality, activities, predilections, all that stuff. We're just, again, spitting images of the respective children. And so, when I wrote, Alyssa's relationship towards Tabby, I drew very heavily from how, I've watched my daughter interact with my son. Because, I feel like I can empathize with her point of view very strongly, since, we do have so much in our outlooks in common. So yeah, those two things were really, really essential to drawing the dynamic between the two children. And then, my sister and I in particular, we loved playing war games. We loved, talking survival scenarios and stuff. We were children of the 80s, so we had the ever imminent invasion from Russia. We had, we still had the specter of, nuclear Armageddon, which was like in everything in the 80s. We read so many books in school about, people being locked in shelters and stuff like that to survive the nuclear war. It was kind of familiar. Like, how do you suss out what the world is? And it's just like, okay, well, these are things we love talking about. There are tons of little conversations, kind of came into play, but at the same time, I'll admit that I did really work to make this apocalyptic scenario a little more unsurvivable than a lot of or maybe not unsurvivable, a little more hostile in numerous ways, in a way that's even like a traditional nuclear holocaust might not feel.
Yeah, it's amazing what you constructed as kind of the thread behind what's going on, which I will not breathe a word of, obviously. But listeners at home, you're gonna be impressed by this one. It's pretty interesting concept. So most apocalyptic threats are biological or human. Your characters of the Shimmer People feel like something older and stranger than either of those. What gap in the existing horror landscape were you trying to fill with those characters?
Well, I think, at its core, one of the biggest things I'm going for with those creatures is that, is the nature of light. Light is a major theme in the story. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that, a huge part of sort of the heart of the story is the light the sisters find in each other. They tell stories to each other. They motivate each other. They help each other through some of the absolute worst possible scenarios. And so one of the ideas I was working with is that, these two sisters are essentially, living off of each other's light. But then, in contrast, darkness is sort of often used as a metaphor for evil or something bad. And, in approaching this story, I really wanted to take light and make it something that was also terrifying. So that way, on the one hand, it is this really positive, this noble thing that helps these characters survive. But I also wanted it to be the thing that they feared the most. That every impulse is stay away from the light. Don't turn to each other, withdraw into darkness. That's how you survive. And you see throughout the story, all these other characters who in their own ways have withdrawn into their own darknesses. It was a major theme that I put into, the side characters, like, Bentley and Maisie, for example, in their own sort of shelter. Part of the design behind the Shimmer People was to sort of change the way we felt about light, during the course of the story. And then, I think to a certain extent, on the one hand, like they are meant to feel like some sort of intruder from another dimension. I definitely want that to be a core part of their feel, but as the story unfolds, I also want them to feel like they're part of something that is both biological and technological. So when the characters, when Tabby enters the church, I won't describe what she sees there, but it is distinctly biological in feel, and it's something that, of course, connects to some of the later reveals of that part of the narrative. So there is this sort of biological corruption that is spreading all over the landscape, and that in and of itself gets a bit inverted as well. But then also, what makes light in the modern world? Technology, right? We do learn very early on that Tabby and Alyssa's father, works for the Department of Energy. We know that there's some hints towards what he's doing there. And so I also wanted to feel like the Shimmer People might be some sort of technology we don't understand. It's that famous, I think was it Clark who said, any technology that is sufficiently advanced will appear to us as if it's magic. And I also kind of wanted to work with that as well. Really, of all of the creatures I've ever put into novels and stories, I think I really was trying to do the most with the Shimmer People.
Yeah, and one thing that I liked that kind of flipped the script a little bit as far as the way when the girls, obviously they get to a certain point where they need to go out and look for provisions, look for help in some form. And you would think two girls, like they'd want to do it during the day. They wouldn't want to go out at night, but actually they prefer the night because they can see the Shimmer People. It's actually more dangerous in the daylight.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was, I really wanted to take that standard trope that, the monsters come out at night. And in this case, they do come out at night, but at the same time, yeah, it's easier to navigate. It's easier to negotiate them, when their light is the only light that's out there. That was a fun little piece of design.
Yeah. Well, you've characterized this as the story of two final girls. What shifts in the horror dynamic when the survivors are not teenagers fighting a slasher, but young children who have no frame of reference for what's happening to them?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So I think one of the biggest things that I would emphasize there is the way in which the nature of character agency changes when you drop the ages. If you look at 16 and 17-year-old characters, you want to take like the first Scream movie or something like that, or some of the classic Friday the 13th, late teen, early adulthood characters. Once you cross that age of about 16 or 17, the audience will increasingly have an expectation of the characters acting correctly, acting rightly, of having, an understanding that you simply can't expect of a 13 and 8-year-old character. And at the same time, I didn't want Tabby and Alyssa to be, dumb. I didn't want them to make all these horrid decisions just because, they're just dumb kids. I really wanted to make sure that I sell the audience on the fact that, they are intelligent, that they're, that they have some capability, and that at the same time, though, the challenges they face they change significantly. One scene I can use as an example that couldn't happen in a story with teenage protagonists that are like 16 or 17 or something is that, there's a sequence, and I won't say what leads up to it, where the two girls are trapped in a garage. And, for the most part, really the challenge literally is them figuring out how to get the garage door open. And, it's a laborious and difficult process for them that actually results in some additional injury to them. That kind of scene where you see these characters grappling with parts of a world that most of us would feel are familiar, but to them it's wholly foreign. I think you can then start extrapolating that onto the larger scale. So, right at the opening, Alyssa meets the old man in the darkened house. And, there's that question, can she trust him? Is it possible for her to trust him? Does she know how to identify whether he's trustworthy or not? And, one of the things I really wanted to press with that character was I wanted to give him a lot of subtle signs that, he may be somebody you can't trust, that he may be more of a threat than his advanced age and infirmity would make him seem. But I also, later in the story, revisit him. And, I hope to cast him in a slightly different light. I won't say whether he helps them or hurts them when we see him about 2/3 of the way through the story. But I didn't want that to play out where, they're kids. They just didn't recognize how creepy he was. I wanted it to be a more nuanced interaction where I'm really thinking about, how would a kid, a 13-year-old girl who has somebody else to protect, how is she going to navigate these questions of trust in a stranger when there's nobody else to turn to? All of the normal routes of help are gone.
Yeah, like a teenage girl can usually tell if she's being looked at lustfully or with some sort of vicious intent, and these girls are trying to figure it out in real time. Like, I don't understand what's going through this guy's head. I've never had to worry about this before. I've had dad standing next to me,
Absolutely. And, and they find themselves faced with characters as well who will openly do potentially horrible things to them. It's at least in the real world, if you had these two girls who are on their own, you're always sheltered by the public eye. Anywhere you go, and granted, people are kidnapped and horrible things happen all the time, but when they're in that public open space, there is that sort of veneer of safety that comes from, a perpetrator knowing they're potentially being observed. One of the things that this story's world does is, because it's so sparsely populated, anybody who's still there can operate however they want without impunity. And that's definitely, I think, raises the stakes for a lot of those interactions.
Well, the girls, as we've been talking about, inherit a mystery they didn't ask for. And the main crux, or the main question that's kind of at the heart of it, is how did their father know what was about to happen? So how does that particular bizarre question function as a weight that they carry into every decision they make after they surface from the bomb shelter?
I think the gravity of the situation itself is a huge part of that, right? If it was, I don't know, if they went upstairs and they found a pile of, $25 million covered in blood, in some ways it functionally wouldn't be that different, right? Where, the father has, shut them down there without explanation, and suddenly they discover he's done something. So, at its core, that's part of the element, but the scale of what's happened where, you have the Shimmer People, you have the corrosive rain, you have just this sort of widespread desolation. You have cars half packed in their driveways. You have all of these signs of, something massive and horrible happening. And then you have this possibility that the father is a part of orchestrating something that large. So yeah, it's not like, he's a common criminal. It's not like he's just, potentially a murderer or something like that. They have to wonder, if he's done something on a biblical scale, just about, because if nothing else, he seems to be, one of the first to know. But no, at the same time though, one of the largest purposes of the device was to, have the girls have this question and essentially deprive them of any hope of answer. One of the things that you see pretty quickly is, they, by the time they've left the shelter, they don't seem to think a whole lot about finding mom and dad. Well, of course, there's a little bit more with mom. But that's a whole side story of it, but they're not actively really looking for their father at that point. So, that in between, they've had to accept something. Something has changed from when you see them shut down in the shelter and, they're out on the surface that has stopped that questioning. And I think that in and of itself is, a significant emotional implication for them. Because if it was something good, if they found out he was innocent, or if they just found out he was dead or something like that, in a simple way, I think that would be something they more actively think about.
Yeah, and the sisters, they don't just face monsters or the apocalypse. They also have to decide what kind of story they're living inside. Like they basically have to become little philosophers, like they have to go through the stoic route. Is it the reality we're in correct? Or is it just basically our judgment? Do we need to turn our judgment around as to how we're interpreting this? Are we going to realize that this is just a meaningless life and live in revolt like little Camus, like was that something that was important to you for them to have to just really either find a meaning to life or find a reason to exist regardless of the lack of meaning?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, that's something that kind of unfolds to some extent, at least from the start to the first couple chapters. You meet Alyssa. She's investigating this ruined house in the opening scene. And, one of the things that emerges about her character is how she's very succinctly, I think, sort of defined what she believes her moral role to be. She's the one with the purpose. She's decided that they need to get up the mountain. She's decided that she's the one who has to find them supplies to get up the mountain. So, right from that opening scene, she has that motivation. The second side of it is that she also, is insisting, okay, I need to protect Tabby. I need to ensure that she's not the one exposed to danger, which is, why in that opening sequence, they have separated. She's left Tabby back at a hiding place that she believes will be at least temporarily safe, because her priority is to be Tabby's protector, to be the one who safeguards things. In contrast, when we meet Tabby, first thing we see is that Tabby has abandoned her hiding spot and has gone upstairs into a nearby house to try to find more comfortable lodgings to wait from. And then she's up there with their pet dog Bramble that they rescued shortly after emerging, and she's playing fetch with him, in this child's bedroom that she's hunkered down in. And so for her, she's the one who is actually, on the one hand, she doesn't seem to think the purpose is the priority, that, she's trying to preserve a quality of life for herself, that, she wants comfort and not just survival. She wants to find moments of joy and not just the next thing to eat. And so, I really wanted from the beginning to start thinking about, how did these girls start defining their place in it? And then, as the story progresses, of course, we see that there are a lot of things that challenge their moral stability, whether it be, Alyssa's encounters with her mother, whether it be the ambiguous influence of Pom Pom.
Pom Pom's shit.
Pom Pom was one of my favorite parts of that story to write. Actually, literally was the inspiration for the story. I had this image in mind at the very first thing I ever wrote for this, and I forget the working title at the time. It was a scene of Alyssa and Tabby hiding behind a log with Pom Pom set on top of it, and they were ducked down behind the log except for Pom Pom while something was a massive explosion was happening in the distance. And even though that never made the final draft, it got cut early on. That was actually the beginning point, and where I started asking, okay, so who are these two girls? Why do they think that this stuffed ferret is going to be, some sort of watch for them as they're, why are they putting it up to watch this explosion? And a lot of their core characters, sort of emerged out of questioning that particular scene. But, and then you have Tabby, who encounters, of course, the priest in the church, about, 5 or 6 chapters in. And so, yeah, all of these characters they run into, they're all potential, all potential guides, all potential protectors, in some capacity or another. And each one of them sort of challenges their moral boundaries and definitions in different ways, because at the end of it, one of the things I really thought about is, you have these two characters, these two little girls. And I think that the thing the readers are going to want the most out of them is that they stay somehow innocent, but they're in a story where survival and innocence are not necessarily compatible. And so I also want to strain, stress, and potentially break that innocence over the course of their journey.
Hey, I'm just looking up something here, like the being drawn to the top of the mountain, that shows up, the Sermon on the Mount shows up in a lot of religious texts, religious iconography. And I was looking up here, I was curious to know, is that what is considered one of the Jungian archetypes? And says is absolutely consistent with Jungian symbolic language, though being attracted to the top of the mountain is not itself named. It is a classic symbol of the spiritual ascent. Okay, the quest for meaning and the path toward higher consciousness or individuation. Yeah.
So that's a tricky question to answer without massive spoilers.
Oh, yeah. No. I was just, I didn't know if that's the way that found its way into it, is like, it's not out of the question for people that have just suffered the end of the world to have some sort of spiritual inclination. And if there was some, nod to Jungian psychology or something like that, kind of like spirituality happens after major disasters, like after the plague, the Renaissance,
Well, I mean, there are definite themes of spirituality in here. I will say it is established very early on that the girls themselves are not religious, and neither is their family particularly. So, at the same time, one of their early encounters is, one of Tabitha's early encounters is with a priest. And, that priest has definitely, he's adapted a place that he finds appropriate in this apocalypse. It does lead to what I hope will be a fairly intense encounter. But at the same time, whenever you have elements like that, it's inevitably going to set in motion some of these questions. And this is definitely a life or death situation. The title is called "Eat the Light," and the light inevitably has spiritual connotations along with it. So it's another major part of where that idea comes from. You also have, trying to think of how to say this without getting too far towards the end of the story when things get really fucking weird. Yeah. but no, you also have this idea of of the storytelling of these little girls. Especially Alyssa's stories to Tabby, but we also see that relationship inverts at points in the story as well. And stories themselves have often been sort of said to be inspired by the light. They come from the light inside of us. They shine light into the darkness. To sort of steal the Dante notion of limbo. Paradise Lost. One of my favorite lines from that was, abashed the devil stood when he felt how awesome goodness, or how awful goodness is. And it's in the context of the blinding light of goodness, which taken from a different point of view is also massively destructive. And so, yeah, there's a lot of elements that spin into that theme. And they definitely very directly come to both a literal and figurative head later in the story, during some of the key climactic action.
Gotcha. Well, so the bunker is supposed to represent safety, but it operates more like a psychological mold. How did those weeks underground shape who the sisters are by the time they step into a ruined world with no one to guide them?
So a place I'd actually sort of refer to, and it's funny because just by a bit of coincidence, I literally just taught this book, was Maus by Art Spiegelman. And right at the beginning, book one, the character of Vladek is speaking with his son Art. And they're of course, based on real people. And Artie is playing with, he's roller skating with some of his friends, and he trips and hurts himself, and the other kids kind of make fun of him and run off. And so Art goes crying to his father about it, and his father's response is, here, come help me with what I'm doing. But if you want to talk about your friends, just put them in a room with no food and water for a week, and you're going to find out who your friends are. And I think one of the things I really wanted to do in this story was I wanted to put these two girls through, in some ways, the ultimate test. And, I'll admit I'm not an extreme author, so I recognize that, I could have told a far more hideous story. But that's not the type of stories I want to tell. But I mean, I think it is a pretty brutal and unflinching story in a lot of different ways. And, I really wanted that shelter to, to be a massive test for what their love for each other is able to survive. And then also what it's able to accomplish in that space. A lot of my stories are pretty dark. And this one I don't think is an exception, but, I actually really, really wanted to, have something very uplifting about these girls that runs through the center of it. And I think in its own way, it's something that, is a defining point, and it's what emerges from that bunker to me as the storyteller.
I mean, it's not like it's gratuitous, and it's not, I was about to say it's not super gory, but it kind of is in a lot of spots. I would say that at least this one kind of nudges extreme horror. You know what I mean? Would you agree?
I mean, it's fair. There's a couple of brutal moments. Some of them happen in pretty dark ways. I'll definitely go along with that. But at the same time, I don't think it ever, it never revels in its own violence, never plays it to parody. It always treats it with seriousness and gravity. I don't think, I'm not sure that there's any of the violence that I could remove and not have it be the same meaning to the story. Each major moment was carefully selected to either enhance a theme, to reflect a particular meaning that I was trying to draw out, or to add something significant to really the relationship between our two central characters.
Yeah, I mean, the gore that's in it, the decay, even the gross, is just kind of like an accent. Like what's extreme is the psychological anguish, like the soul crushing things that happen in some of the scenes, which, I mean, kind of analogous to McCarthy, The Road.
Oh, McCarthy definitely had a significant influence on the book. I'm a huge fan of The Road. I've taught it a couple of times, actually, including this last year while I was writing the book. Yeah, I mean, that was a major work that informed this. The Road itself has some extreme moments, but I wouldn't consider it an extreme horror book by any definition. Instead, those extreme moments are fundamentally necessary to that book meaning and doing what it does. And it's in a way that's not sensationalized or, it's shocking, but it's not shocking because it's trying to shock you. It's shocking because it reflects a type of reality that I think a lot of us would prefer not to reflect upon.
Yeah. It's a little too real.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. And so, I think, to me, the most extreme scene is probably when one of the girls gets sick. The expression of the symptoms is, it's gross. But it's also, actually in keeping with the progression of illness that you would expect from the disease that causes it. And so, that was one where, one of the biggest goals was to create a situation that, clearly placed these little girls over their heads, especially, the one that is forced to sort of clean up the mess. I think it's the place that really drives home to the readers that, this isn't like a YA story or something like that. The danger for our characters is very real. And it's going to come from sources you may not initially expect.
Yeah. Well, you've spoken openly in other interviews, including previous appearances on my show, about your deep fear of losing your grip on reality. How much of that personal anxiety lives inside the sisters' experience of stepping out into a world that no longer follows any recognizable rules?
Well, I mean, I think that as a horror author, if we want to try to write something that's going to either scare, upset, unnerve, or something along those lines, one of the most effective ways we're going to do it is to write from the things that upset us. And so, first off, that one of the biggest goals here was to strip these girls of every single route for help that they normally would have been able to pursue. Anything that looked like a support mechanism, I did my best to take away from them, especially, right from that opening scene. You have them wandering in this darkness. You have no chance. There's no police, there's no firefighters, no ambulances. When they find a priest, the church is broken down and derelict, and the idea of surviving there does not sound appealing in the least. Rain, often sort of, a sign of hope in a lot of situations. It cleans, it cleanses, it causes things to grow and germinate. This rain does nothing but destroy. Again, the light itself is meant to be sort of defamiliarized. You want to see in the darkness normally. And in this case, seeing in the darkness may well be death. I work to corrupt the concept of eating in this story as well. From the very beginning, of course, one of the things that we see is, Alyssa trapped in the pantry. Around her, the Shimmer person's presence is literally destroying all of the food through the doorway, even though it may not know that those supplies are there. I want to show that, even though they seem to have some sense of how to survive and find food, even that's the thing that they've learned since they've emerged from the shelter, that too is under threat and fire.
Yeah. I've heard that said by many authors. You write what you're afraid of, you write what you fear. I would be afraid that as I'm writing these detailed scenes that deal with my, worst fear, that I would just it would be like stamped into my subconscious, where I just have these like night terrors. Does that ever happen? Like, you're just like, oh God, I can't wait to be done with this book, as I keep waking up in cold sweats, freaking my wife out.
No, I have to admit,
you will now. No, just
No, it's really something that doesn't get to me. When I sit down to work on the stories, I do immerse myself really heavily in the moments. As I'm writing a scene or sequence, I can experience them pretty vividly. I'm working on a book right now that's wildly different than anything else I've ever done, and it's gleeful. It's kind of manic and crazed, and it's just an absolute blast. But I absolutely get into the emotions of the scenes. But then when I step away from the computer, that's it. I'll drive the kids to school sometimes, and I'll start running through ideas for a story in my head, and, a section or what happens next, or I'll start thinking about dialogue. But when I'm in the process of writing, it's, I kind of sync up with it. But yeah, when I'm done, it is something that just kind of cuts off. Some of the things that the two girls go through are situations that would be, that I think are absolutely devastating. And I will say this book does have, one scene in it that is very difficult for me to work back through. I won't say which one that is at the moment, but it is actually probably the only scene that I have written that I actively don't like working on.
Okay. Well, we've talked a little bit about the way light is treated within the story. As far as the title goes, most post-apocalyptic titles point toward survival or collapse. Your title points toward consumption. So, what did you want that word eat to communicate about the specific nature of this catastrophe?
So, couple of different ways I can answer that. I think in its simplest form, especially when you look at things like the rain, and you look at the theme of trying to find, sustenance, that there is an element where the world's literally being eaten. The rain itself is kind of consuming it. We see that when we get to the church, there's some sort of biological growth that threatens to consume it. The Shimmer People have ambiguous motives about what they're trying to do, but we quickly see, for example, that Alyssa, things want to eat her. She has that encounter outside, outside the drain pipe where she had left Tabby, that leaves her in pretty, serious shape. The world itself wants to eat these children. And then moving from that, I'll actually say the original title of the book was slightly longer. The working title that I had settled on for the vast majority of composition, all the way up actually to the first cover that I got, was Dead Hearts Eat the Light. The original concept I was working from is that when these two girls are sealed into that shelter, in a lot of ways they do kind of die. After that they're dead, but they're still alive, and that they're no longer part of the world. The world that they knew is no longer there for them. That was a very foundational idea. And then, okay, so you have these two dead hearts. Well, they're going to eat the light. They're going to survive off of the goodness in each other. They're going to survive on this light of inspiration from their stories. That was a major operating idea for it. But at the same time, you can't survive that way, right? Light, as powerful as it is and as amazing as it is, and as much as it can do, one thing it can't do is it can't feed you. Sure, I guess you could say it grows crops that then feed you, but ultimately sustenance itself can never come from lights. And so that idea of eating the light is also meant to be sort of something futile, something that is simply impossible, no matter how appealing it might seem.
Have you ever done the experiment, like you just come out with this book or any book, you've gotten to the point where you're passing out arcs and just handed one to somebody and said, okay, just right off the bat, look at the title, look at the picture. What's the general gist of what you think this story is about?
I've never done that actually, but now I kind of want to.
Yeah. Just to see, reflex, first thought that comes to their head. Like, I'm getting vibes about some sort of, nuclear winter or something like that. Just curious.
No, that's actually a cool idea. I might have to do that. The cover of this one was an idea that I'd wanted from the very beginning, though. I knew that it's drawn directly from the opening scene. It does refer to other elements of the story that are really important, but that image of the grill with the skulls on it, the burned bear on the walk. Once the story really started to kind of come to me, and I started to figure out what its voice and angle were going to be, that really was the just about the first thing I wrote. There was I had that original concept, and I started exploring it, and then when I sat down to actually write it, the very first line that came to me is the first line of the story. That scene of Alyssa looking through the break in the brick wall at the house. As I wrote it, I built out the atmosphere between that moment and the scene on the cover. But that really was one of the first sort of the first images that's in the final story that came to me.
Yeah. Christian Bentelin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, he still has he's done almost every one of my covers. The only exception is my Try Not to Die book, which was done by, and I hope he forgives me. I can't remember his name offhand, but he's done all of the covers for the Try Not to Die series, so it only made sense for him to do mine. But no, otherwise, yeah, Christian did Extinction Dream, Mobius Store, Gauntlet Talk, In Those Fading Stars, and Neverborn Thief. So he's been a huge part of the finished aesthetic of my books, and I love his work, and I do hope to pretty much continue working with him indefinitely.
Is he kind of a resident designer for Wicked House?
Well, I mean, he does work. He does a lot of covers, so he does work for a lot of different authors. He does work for several different presses, including actually Athon. He does some covers for Crystal Lake as well. But he's done. I would probably say 80% of the Wicked House covers at this point. We do have a couple other artists we work with, but he's the first person we've turned to for virtually everything. He's very talented. He's always been a real pleasure to work with.
Yeah. Well, in a lot of horror, childhood is something remembered. In this book, it feels like something being actively destroyed in real time. So what did that allow you to explore that an adult-centered apocalypse story simply could not reach?
Well, honestly, I think resilience is the reason I wanted to do that. I think even at the end of the story, while you have characters, you have Tabby and Alyssa at various different points making decisions that are far beyond their age. So that does happen. But at the same time, it allowed me to, I think, preserve a certain purity in their relationship that I don't think I could have done with adult characters. There's several scenes that would come to mind where I feel like if I were to have older characters explain these scenes or witness them, and think about the other's part in it, I think that the moral implications of those actions would very much be a dominating factor. Whereas with these two girls, one thing that I think that they're able to do is they're able to move on from things and be unchanged in how they view each other in a way that older characters I don't know that it would be possible.
Yeah, it seems like, I guess with children, you would be less likely to have emotional hangups causing them to behave in not backstabbing, but, like more concerned with their own survival than they're willing to let on and maybe like cross each other.
Well, a great example. So my son Elliot he's 10, and if you watch him play with his friends, this was especially true when he was 8 or so. You'd watch a group of him and his friends playing, and they'd be getting along just fine. And then all of a sudden, things would deteriorate, and one of them might hit each other or something like that, or they'll be yelling at each other and just absolutely lividly furious, or one of them's bawling and heartbroken, and then 3 minutes later they're just tossing a ball back and forth. There's that ability to sort of move forward and clean the slate, I think, is really important for this story in particular. And it doesn't, it's not to say that I make these girls like, psychotic or something like that. They certainly have moral compasses, but at the same time, I think older characters, they'd be brooding and ruminating on some of these things. You'd have deeper grudges and grudges that, that they won't let go of in darker ways, I think, than kids do.
Yeah, and with that resilience, like a lot of apocalyptic fiction is about rebuilding society. This one seems more geared toward whether these girls can survive with a sense of self intact because, I mean, they're not even fully through adolescence yet. So what drew you toward the interior collapse rather than the exterior one?
Well, I think to some extent trying to find a story that only I can tell. I think the larger apocalyptic narrative is is a lot more familiar. I think we've seen society fall apart in so many different ways, different films, or maybe reality.
Real time.
Exactly. But no, I think a lot of the bigger picture tropes of the apocalypse, they've been done, and they've been done in fantastic ways. I was really drawn to The Road. I actually really love that book. I don't get tired of rereading it, and I think I think my story is pretty different from McCarthy's in a lot of ways. But at the same time, one thing I really liked about that book was that even in the ugliest parts of that story, you still had a father and son who are, quote unquote, determined to keep the fire burning. I think, sure, that outwardly could be like the flame of civilization or something like that. But, I think to a certain extent, it's just really the light of human decency. And I think, I think, in this one, I really want it to be, it sounds kind of lame when you put it in really simplistic terms, but, I really want it to be the light of sisterhood. That is the burning core of the story. And I think you can only really do that through turning it inward, rather than having this sort of, big, epic, large scale story.
Mm-hmm. Well, society is potentially finished in this world, but the novel never seems to particularly, or at least to be particularly interested in mourning it. What were you actually mourning in this book?
I think, I don't know. That's actually a really tough one. Because the easiest answers go straight to parts of the ending of the book. I think, though, from the very beginning, something that would stand out to me is, and it even comes back, I think, to one of your first questions is, the father and mother lock their children in the shelter, right? And, the parents go off to, do whatever it is that they're trying to do in their flight from the place. And, of course, we do learn more about that at the end of the story. But I think from the entry point of the story, we're supposed to think, I would have gone in to that bunker, right? I think at least that would be my impulse would be, I couldn't possibly just leave the kids there. Even if I thought, I could get somewhere or something like that or whatever, it would make more sense for me to try to help them. And so I think at the same time, there are a lot of people who would be able to make that decision. And I think there's a bond that gets severed right at the beginning. I think, there's a part of the story that explores the idea of dysfunctional family. I think if I was grieving anything, it's the kind of family where a parent, would be able to walk away from their kids, in a crisis. And, I think those are actually very real, and, it's sad, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Well, you wrote two children navigating a world that has no interest in their well-being. What position does this book take on whether the universe is indifferent or whether it's something worse than indifferent?
Well, I definitely want the world of the story to feel actively hostile. It is meant to be a place that is supposed to feel like it's antithetical to somebody surviving in it. That everything has been turned to something, everything good has been turned into something destructive. And I think it comes to a head in two different ways. One through what I like to think of as the overworld narrative, the narrative on the surface, and the underworld narrative, the narrative in the shelter. They each kind of resolve that idea in their own way. But, I think that at the end of the story, I actually don't want it to be a universe that is inherently malevolent or indifferent. I do think that there are signs of hope in the story. And I think that I want it to be possible that there's light there somewhere. I don't necessarily want to show you that light in the story, but I want it to feel like a possibility.
Well, you've described your fiction as being driven by scientific research and mythology. How do you move from raw research material to emotional decisions for your characters rather than just using it as window dressing?
I mean, I think to some extent, some of it comes from the fact that when you're really interested in a subject, I mean, it creates an emotional response. It can be awe, it can be shock, it could be disgust, it could be, fascination. But I think that if you're just researching something to tell a story from it, I think there's going to be sort of an inherent disconnect where I think there's always going to be some distance between you and the emotions of the characters. And I find that research just to tell a story never really works for me. So when I research, I see it actually, honestly, as independent from my storytelling. I read about black holes. I read about quantum states. I read about, I was just talking about quantum probability in one of my classes the other day. I read about, so there's this really cool study where they discovered that hair is not actually pushed from your follicles like they had always believed, that instead there's a different type of cell that's basically pulls the hair out of the follicle. It's this weird little detail, right? But it's I think it's fascinating. I think it's freaking amazing. And so, in my free time, I read about these things that are all things that I'm really, really excited about. And by excited, of course, I mean, that can be any sort of emotion, right? That I feel pretty strongly. I also read things that I find absolutely horrifying. I read things that I think are just absolutely baffling, and that kind of stuff. And, basically, as I start telling stories, I'm then able to pull from all of these different sources. And my goal is always to read about enough different things that there's always something I can connect to. One exercise I love doing with my classes, like creative writing classes, we talk about, making metaphors. And so one of the things we'll often do is we'll sort of start emptying out our bags. I'll take some objects out of my backpack and be like, hey, if you've got anything that's, other than a textbook, pull it out of your backpack for a moment. Let's see if we can make a metaphor out of that. And, whatever you grab for at that point, whatever object you have, if you also think about, what it might represent, you can then start building bridges to yourself. So my goal, though, is just to always have read in so many different directions about so many types of things that interest me, that when I need to pull something emotional for a character, or I need to, if I want to work something odd or new into a story, I already have stuff there that I find genuinely exciting, that I have genuine emotional reactions to, and that then helps me react to it within the story in an emotional way.
Well, moving from the sanity of the two girls to your own sanity, your life includes teaching, parenting, publishing, game design, gardening, and writing some of the darkest fiction being published right now. What part of that life is most essential for keeping you functional as a person? The darkest fiction being published right now in your particular niche. I mean, like we said earlier, you're not writing splatterpunk where people are having sex with corpses and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I think that the two sort of layers I'd put are, first off, obviously family is the thing that's most essential to me. At the end of the night, me and my kids and my wife, we all cuddle up on the couch. We watch movies, we play games together. That is more important to me than anything else. It does more to keep me sane, than anything else that's in my life. Second, I would definitely say that, the writing is absolutely essential to me. It's just part of how I interact with the world. It's something I do, idiosyncratically, like I said earlier, I'll be driving to drop my kids off, right? And I'll just start running through parts of a scene, and then the kids get out of the car, I get away from their school, and then I'll usually open my email and start dictating whatever the heck I was just thinking about, and it's just it's a huge part of just the way my mind processes things. Something bad happens to me. I want to write about it. Sometimes I want to hug my family. Sometimes I want to write about it. It's kind of those two sides of the thing, the two sides of it. Otherwise, teaching is a huge part of my life, of course. I do love it. I love classroom dynamics. I love, I love the opportunity to help shape people productively. One of the things that, I decided very early on in my career is that, I do hope my writing takes off. I do hope it affects a large number of people. But at the end of the day, teaching is the way I've chosen to sort of make a difference in the world. It's something, it's my service to, to people. At the same time, it does kind of free me up where, I feel like it helps me sleep at night. I feel like I'm fighting a good fight with it, even when I get really frustrated or, sometimes it's like, well, AI is just going to fuck us all over. And so, what the hell am I even doing? But then, at the end of the day, though, you go into the classroom the next day and you teach a new lesson and, you're like, hey, maybe the 15 kids in this room are going to be slightly better off for it. And I get good feedback, so I think it's kind of working. I think the better question is, if I had to do away with any of those things, I don't know. It's tough. I might say the gardening. I've taken breaks from it before because it is one of the more disposable stretches of time. Like if I had to pick between hanging out with the kids and gardening, it would definitely be the kids every time. If I had to pick between writing and gardening, I'd probably pick writing. Running the publishing company, of course, it's not just me. I do have to stress that it's, me and Joe Hempel are the main operators, but then, Steve Bolio and Rhett Bruno, just, they're fantastic, support and just wealths of knowledge on the industry. It's new to me. So I haven't quite figured out its overall place in the hierarchy of things. But I'm loving the hell out of it. It's been a really cool adventure. And, and finally, game design, it's just neat. Like for lack of a better way to put it, it's like, it's this weird thing that I do that's very different from any of my other projects. And me and John Cohen will, we'll have a session of play testing every other week or something like that, or we'll just, randomly just start pitching some ideas for how to adjust the mechanic. Right now, of course, we're about to launch the Kickstarter on April 7th. And so we're really gearing up for that. That's our big drive at the moment. But the game design has just been this really cool. So it's like one of those really fun side quests in an RPG. It's not the main storyline, at least not at the moment. Who knows if it blows up, maybe it'd be something. But otherwise it's just, it's something that I've done purely for the fun of it, just because, it's something that was really fun to explore and try out.
Nice. Sounds good, my friend. Well, Andrew, as always, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Dude, I'm always delighted to be on the show and delighted just to hang out and chat for a bit.
Absolutely. So as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug, reiterate, or let your readers know about?
A couple of quick things. Of course, I do want to mention again the Kickstarter for The Bad Side of Town, 2 to 4 player cooperative game with a serial killer dark comedy theme. Does launch April 7th, and having folk supporting that is definitely going to be big because Kickstarters are like a class that's pass fail. It's there's that base goal you got to meet. But no, it's also it's a really fun game, and so I am hoping that we pull it off and that it gets out to a lot of people. But then Eat the Lights comes out April 24th, and I actually do now have a contract for an audiobook for it with Tantor, so that's coming down the road as well. And then I do anticipate to have my first hardcover release in Eat the Light, which will also be really exciting.
Right. Sounds good. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Andrew, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you, man.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.